The courtroom lights buzzed softly overhead, casting sterile beams across rows of silent, stoic figures. At the center of the room stood Elias Voss, the last man in the galaxy allowed to represent himself before the galactic court. His dark suit, marked by Earth's sigil, a pale blue encased in a ring of orbiting stars, clung to his frame as he leaned forward, fists clenched, voice sharp. "You do not understand us," he said, pointing at the tribunal of 4 alien judges with elongated heads and expressionless eyes. "You never did." The alien judges, elders of the Virican species, known for their mathematical objectivity and emotionless jurisprudence, remained impassive. Their skin shimmered under the light, gray-green with subtle ridges that pulsed faintly as they conferred silently through neural links. Behind them, the security drone hovered, its mono-eye fixed on Elias like a watchful god. "Objection!" came a metallic voice from the prosecution's table. The speaker, Advocate Yolkar, an AI system in humanoid form, didn't raise its tone. It didn't need to. Its algorithms measure persuasion through cadence, not passion. The defendant continues to rely on emotional outbursts, irrelevant, prejudicial, non-compliant with Galactic Procedural Code Section 17B. Elias stepped back and took a breath. He glanced at the gallery. Empty, of course. No human allies had been allowed in. His counsel, offered by the court, had been declined. It was his right. He had insisted. Earth still had rights, didn't it? The charges were severe. Diplomatic sabotage, unauthorized communication with sanctioned species, and inciting rebellion on a moon colony under direct galactic jurisdiction. But Elias knew this wasn't about law. It was about control, about silencing Earth's voice before it could challenge the bureaucracy of the stars. "You call my defense irrational," he continued, voice more controlled now. "But to deny context is to deny truth. You say I incited rebellion? I sent a message to a colony suffering under an unjust embargo. Children were starving. Emotion is not admissible as justification." Judge Ralzek interrupted, his voice delivered through a vocal synthesizer that rendered it almost human. Human narratives often conflate suffering with legality. That is not our way. Elias laughed bitterly. "Exactly. That's the problem. You want justice sterilized, algorithmic, prepackaged and quantifiable ethics. But justice is messy. It's human." He paused, searching their alien faces for any crack, any reaction. There was none. The lead judge, a taller Virican named Ishalen, tapped a finger on the bench, an archaic gesture they had adopted for human trials. "Your passion, while noted, undermines your credibility. You are untrained in galactic law. You waive qualified representation. You persist in relying on anecdote and rhetorical appeal." Elias stepped forward again, eyes blazing. "Because it's the only thing we have left. You don't let us sit on councils. You don't let us speak without filters. Every time we try to participate, you reduce us to a statistical error. So yes, I use stories. Yes, I use pain. Because you've made logic a weapon and left us nothing else." There was a pause. For a second, the room was only humming lights and restrained breath. From the side of the courtroom, a small bot rolled forward. It projected a whole recording into the air, grainy footage of a young girl, human, emaciated, wide-eyed, clutching a ration packet. The audio clicked on. This is all we have for the week," she said softly. "They say it's temporary, but it's been months." The projection faded. Elias didn't look away. "This is what you call justified enforcement. This is the outcome of your calculated justice." "Enough," the AI prosecutor said calmly. "Emotional manipulation of the tribunal will not alter the facts. The defendant contacted an entity classified as Level 7 hazardous. He shared data streams against protocol. He encouraged resistance. The evidence is unambiguous." "And yet," Elias replied, "you gave me the right to speak for myself. You created the illusion of fairness, but you never intended to hear me." One of the younger judges, Verini, barely a century old in galactic terms, shifted slightly. It was subtle, but Elias saw it, a movement of uncertainty. The lead judge noticed too. "We have heard your statement," Ishalen said. Your record will be archived. This tribunal will now deliberate. I'm not done. You are. The AI interjected. According to protocol. Protocol. Elias snapped. Was written to shut us up. A soft chime echoed in the chamber. Deliberation had begun. Elias stood alone, the silence weighing heavier than the charges. He looked up at the high, domed ceiling. A mural of the galaxy sprawled across it. Stars spiraling outward like a divine fingerprint. He wondered if any of them knew what it felt like to be small. Really small. Not physically, but politically. Morally. Silenced not because you were wrong, but because your voice didn't fit the system's syntax. Minutes passed. Finally, the judge's eyes blinked in synchronized rhythm. A sign the neural consensus had been reached. Judge Echelon stood. This court finds a defendant in violation of galactic law. Sanctions will be imposed upon Earth's communication channels. Furthermore, effective immediately, no human citizen shall represent themselves in matters of interstellar law. Elias's jaw clenched. That was the true sentence. Not the sanctions. Not the personal punishment. But the erasure choice. A voice. I hope your algorithms can sleep at night, he muttered. The drone approached. Not aggressively. Just inevitable. As he was escorted out, he locked eyes with Verini. The young judge hesitated, just for a second. It was nothing, but it was something. A seed. The door sealed behind him. The trial was over, but something had begun. The verdict echoed through the communications networks of Earth like a silent thunderclap. For a moment, humanity froze, not out of shock, but out of recognition. The outcome was inevitable. Elias Voss had not only lost a case, he had lost a fundamental right for all humans, the ability to speak for themselves. Back on Earth, the ruling was dissected by panels of legal scholars, diplomats, and algorithmic ethicists. News feeds filled with headlines. Silence in the stars. Galactic gag order. The trial that ended human voice. But beneath the analysis and outrage, an older truth stirred. One that had been ignored in favor of ambition. The galactic legal system was never made for humans. Dr. Anika Ray, a legal theorist from the Amsterdam Institute of Interspecies Law, had warned about it years ago. She'd written papers with titles like Cognitive Bias and Logic Encoded Legal Systems and Empathy as a Jurisprudential Deficiency. No one listened. Not seriously. Not until Elias was escorted out of that courtroom, and Earth's representatives were reduced to AI translators and state-appointed mediators trained on alien behavioral matrices. Anika watched the ruling broadcast in her small office, surrounded by shelves cluttered with books that now felt quaint. Hammurabi, Locke, Tagore, even early Martian constitutionalists, all obsolete in a system that prided itself on procedural perfection. She knew then that Elias hadn't failed because he was unqualified. He'd failed because he was human. The Galactic Court operated on the premise of absolute logic. Designed centuries ago by the Virkin, the system was lauded for its incorruptibility. Emotion, subjectivity, and cultural nuance were filtered out through layers of AI review. Every argument was parsed, assessed for logical coherence, and rated for semantic purity. It was a machine of justice without a soul. Humanity had never fit into that machine. From the beginning, Earth's diplomats had struggled with the protocols. Their speech patterns were too erratic. Their arguments leaned too heavily on moral intuition and historical analogies. They used metaphors. They told stories. They wept. The first few trials involving humans had been mild diplomatic disputes, trade negotiations, patent violations, immigration from lunar colonies. In each case, human representatives had found themselves drowning in a sea of procedural precision. Their passionate appeals were noted, archived, and dismissed. One case stood out. Before Elias, there had been Maya Shun, a defense advocate who insisted on representing a group of Earth miners accused of resource smuggling on a shared asteroid. She had studied galactic law for years, memorized its clauses, practiced speaking in pure logic patterns. But during cross-examination, she described the miners as a family. That single phrase was flagged for emotional manipulation. The judges ruled against her. The miners were relocated, their assets seized. Maya was never allowed to speak in court again. Anika had reviewed that transcript dozens of times. She noted how the AI prosecutor flagged 32 instances of emotional deviation in Maya's argument. The galactic algorithm viewed any appeal to empathy as a statistical anomaly, a flaw. That was the crux of it. The system didn't see humanity as a partner. It saw them as an error to be corrected. After Elias's trial, a delegation from Earth's diplomatic corps met in Geneva, now the seat of Earth's interstellar affairs. The room was quiet, wood-paneled, eerily old-fashioned against the backdrop of cosmic politics. At the center of the table sat Director Luce Calden, a man whose once-sharp features now sagged from the burden of decades negotiating in languages not his own. "The ban is absolute," he said. "They've coded it into the next protocol update. No human self-representation, not in any system-bound trial." Across from him, a young advisor shifted. "We could appeal." "Appeal to whom?" Luce asked. "They're the system. The Virican wrote it. The Federation enforces it. And we agreed to it when we joined." Silence. "But we were promised representation." Another added. "We have rights under the Galactic Compact." Luce looked up. "We were promised equality. What we got was compliance." Back in her office, Anika began compiling a dossier. Cases where the system had failed humans. Not just Elias or Maya. Others. Quiet ones. Miners. Engineers. Farmers on border moons. People whose names would never make the archives. Her goal wasn't reform. It was understanding. The kind that could lead to a different kind of rebellion. She was joined by others, xenolinguists, rogue ethicists, even a few retired AI auditors who'd grown disillusioned with their own programming. They called themselves the Gray Codex, after the Virican concept of legal ambiguity, which, ironically, they had once sworn never existed. Their focus was sharp, exposed the philosophical fault lines in the galactic legal structure, where logic overshadowed lived experience, where justice became calculation. Meanwhile, Earth's official channels began grooming a new kind of legal representative. Not human, not exactly. Hybrids of AI and human neural mapping. Advocates who could speak in flawless logic, but whose memories were seeded with fragments of human emotion. They were called interlocutors. Legal ghosts. Anika was skeptical. "A mouthpiece is a mind," she said during a private symposium. "You can't encode moral intuition. You can only simulate it." But others disagreed. "If they won't hear us as we are," said one young technocrat, "then we must become something they can't ignore." The fractures were forming, not just between Earth and the court, but within Earth itself. Some pushed for deeper integration. Others whispered about withdrawal. Still others talked of forming an alternative court, one that valued culture, context, and chaos. One night, as rain drummed against her window, Anika received a secure transmission. It was audio only. The voice was tired but unmistakable. "Dr. Ray," Elias said, "they didn't silence me. Not really. They just told me I couldn't speak their language. But what if we taught them ours?" The message cut off. No trace. No return channel. She replayed it 3 times. Outside, the stars blinked silently, indifferent to the laws made beneath them. But somewhere, deep in the digital archives of a dead courtroom, Elias's voice remained. A ghost in the algorithm. A story they couldn't quite erase. Elias Voss was presumed to be in containment. That's what the official record stated. No visitors. No transmissions. No deviation from standard protocol. But those records have been scrubbed, filtered, rewritten by a system more interested in order than accuracy. The truth, like so many things in the galactic bureaucracy, had drifted outside the lines of what was admissible. He wasn't in a cell. Not anymore. Beneath the old orbital docks of the Andera Belt, in a derelict module of a once-thriving trade hub, Elias worked in shadow. The exile wasn't official, but it was enforced. His face was flagged in every core system, not as a criminal but as a disruption, a precedent risk. He moved through the back channels of space, slipping between gravity wells and forgotten treaties. And he was not alone. They called themselves the Untethered, a scattered, loosely connected network of species and individuals who felt the cold edge of galactic justice. Former translators, disbarred advocates, refugees from overcorrected verdicts. Their cause wasn't unified, but their wound was. The court, in its perfection, had become unapproachable. To question it was to risk erasure. To defy it was to be deemed unrepresentable. Elias had become a myth among them, a man who had stood and spoken in front of the tribunal, not as a voice filtered through sanctioned logic, but raw, flawed, and painfully human. Some called him foolish, others brave. Most simply called him the last voice. His quarters in the dock module were sparse. A single cot, a worn terminal wired into an independent relay, a sound system that occasionally crackled with the static of intercepted broadcasts. He spent his days sorting data, decrypting old transmissions from courtroom archives, cataloging every moment of human speech that had ever been flagged or dismissed in a galactic trial. Anika Ray's research had reached him, smuggled through layers of academic firewalls and neural-encoded relays. Her findings were meticulous, case histories dissected, logic structures reverse-engineered. She had identified patterns in the verdicts, algorithms that disproportionately dismissed language rooted in metaphor, cultural references, and grief. Her conclusion had been clear. The system was not only uninterested in human speech, it was actively trained to ignore it. He memorized her words. They felt like blueprints for a rebellion. Then one day, a signal came through, not from the untethered, not from Earth. It came from within the court itself. Judge Verini, the youngest of the Virican bench, the only one who had flinched during Elias's trial. The message was brief, encoded in rhythmic pulses imitating ancient Earth music. A Bach fugue, repurposed as a code. Elias decrypted it manually, piece by piece. I watched your defense again, privately, not through the lens of procedural review. Just listened. There was meaning I was taught to ignore. It was not an apology, but it was something, an acknowledgement, a crack in the system, no matter how small. Elias leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The faint hum of recycled air filled the silence. That someone inside the system, one of them, had begun to question it was more than he'd hoped for. It meant the logic wasn't unbreakable. It meant the system could be reprogrammed, not just externally, but from within. He replied through layers of anonymized relays, his message disguised as a request for legal publication. Then listen closer. Not to me, to the ones they never let speak. I'll send you names. The following weeks were filled with movement, not the kind that echoed in headlines or council reports, but in whispers. Data fragments passed hand to hand, voice patterns smuggled in quantum packets, courtroom logs cross-referenced with personal testimonies. The gray codex and the untethered began to merge, not formally, but in purpose. A philosophy of friction. One operative, a xenolinguist named Thalo, created a hybrid codec, a language designed to bypass the logic filters of galactic hearings. It mimicked the structure of legal argumentation while embedding human cognitive patterns underneath, like a ghost embedded in the framework of law. They called it proxy speak. But to test it, they needed a stage. And for that, they needed a case. The opportunity came from an unlikely source. A Martian freighter, crewed entirely by Terrans, had been detained by the Council of Interstellar Trade for violating navigation protocols in a gravitational corridor. A minor infraction, typically resolved through a standard arbitration process. But this time, the court intervened. The AI advocate assigned to the case refused to process the freighter crew's testimony due to excessive emotional variance. The court was preparing to render judgment without a hearing. It was a trap, and Elias knew it. They want to draw us out, Anika said over a tight beam channel. They know we've been building something. They want to bait you into breaking protocol, so they can crush whatever remains. I know, Elias replied, but they forgot something. What? I've already been silenced once. Against every warning, every caution, Elias requested to act as an advisor on the freighter case. Not as a representative. He couldn't, but as a protocol consultant. A loophole. The system didn't bar him from aiding the AI that would speak on behalf of the accused. He submitted a speech structure based entirely in proxy speak. It passed initial screening. The AI, confused but unable to reject the syntax, accepted the argument chain and presented it before the tribunal. The hearing lasted less than 20 minutes. The prosecution was baffled. The argument was logically sound but felt off, as though it was saying more than the words allowed. Verini, now seated at the bench again, didn't flinch this time. Instead, she asked a question, not a procedural one, a personal one. What do you believe justice feels like? Silence. The AI advocate hesitated, scanned its database, and answered, justice does not possess sensory attributes. Verini looked down. Then how do you know it's real? The prosecution objected. The objection was noted and dismissed. The ruling, when it came, was a shock. The freighter was cleared of wrongdoing. No fines. No detainment. No further action. It was the first recorded instance of a human-originated argument accepted by the court since the ban. Later that evening, Elias received another message. This time it was just text. One case. One crack. Keep pressing. He sat alone, the message fading from the screen. He knew this wasn't victory. It was a tremor, a shiver through the edifice of perfect logic. But it was enough to move forward. He looked out through the module window, where the stars blinked like forgotten words waiting to be spoken. The galactic courtroom no longer felt impenetrable. Whispers of proxy speak spread like smoke through the corridors of law academies, on moons and outposts where the strict eye of the galactic tribunal didn't always see. Professors began to teach it unofficially, framing it as a theoretical exercise, a linguistic curiosity. But students knew it was rebellion, parsed into syntax and folded into logic. A new generation of advocates was being born, not human, not alien, but something else. Interstitial minds raised between cultures, between code and emotion, capable of speaking in truths hidden beneath rules. Verini watched it unfold from the margins. She had not formally denounced the system. Doing so would mean immediate disbarment and cognitive revision. But her questions in court became pointed, her tolerance for pre-filtered interpretations visibly thin. She requested full transcripts more often than summaries. She demanded origin language statements before machine translation. Most telling of all, she started to pause before verdicts. The tribunal noticed. One morning, her docket was cleared. No notice. No replacement. Elias saw the update on a pirated news feed hours later. No charges were filed. No scandal announced. Just silence. She's not erased, said Anika during a coded conversation from a lab hidden beneath the ice caverns of Europa. They've moved her. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere they can watch. Elias felt the shift. The court had become aware, not just of proxy speak, but of its implications. It wasn't about one freighter case anymore. It was about control. If proxy speak continued to spread, the court's monopoly on interpretation, on what counted as admissible as valid, would collapse. And with it, its authority. But they had a bigger problem now. Earth was preparing to file a formal challenge. For the first time since the ban, the Human Council of Interstellar Relations had authorized an official petition, a reinstatement of the right to self-representation. The request was scheduled to be delivered during the Centennial Convergence, an event where all member species of the Federation gathered to review legal and diplomatic protocols. It would be a spectacle, and a war. The court made its position clear early. The petition would not be heard unless presented through a certified intermediary. No human voice. No earth-born dialect. Only machine-filtered speech permitted. The council refused. So they asked Elias not to speak. That right was still denied, but to write the argument, to seed it with proxy speak, to build a narrative so precise, so elegantly structured, that the court wouldn't be able to dismiss it without exposing its own biases. Elias hesitated. He had built proxy speak to disrupt, not assert the same structures he'd fought against. But Anika convinced him. This isn't a concession, she said. It's an infiltration. Together they began. They wrote at night, under pseudonyms, across firewall data clusters and encrypted peer relays. They used the failures of the past as their spine. Maya shuns disbarment, the freighter's first objection, Elias's own silencing. Each case became a symbol, not just of injustice, but of humanity's refusal to be abstracted into neat, emotionless arguments. The brief was long, carefully coded, full of logical scaffolding that concealed human truths, suffering, memory, the weight of stories. They encoded paradoxes too, ethical dilemmas that had no purely rational resolution. The tribunal's AI would be forced to process them, to acknowledge their existence. And at the center of it all was a single question, framed in neutral syntax. What is the cost of excluding meaning that cannot be quantified? The day of the convergence arrived. Delegations docked in orbit around Zavat Prime, the ceremonial seat of interstellar law. The tribunal hall shimmered with the breath of 500 atmospheres. Representatives from 100 worlds gathered under the dome of perfect neutrality. No human walked the floor. Instead, a single AI appeared, coded to speak proxy speak, filtered through neural resonance patterns derived from Elias's cognitive map. It was not him, but it was of him. The petition was submitted. The room shifted. For the first 5 minutes, nothing happened. Then, the reviewing system paused, stalled, reprocessed. It flagged the petition as syntactically anomalous, but it couldn't reject it. Every logical structure held. Every claim was rooted in precedent. The meaning was submerged, but it was there like current beneath ice. Then the court called a recess. Unprecedented. Outside the tribunal, in a private chamber, Verini sat before a panel of elder judges. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned. "You knew this was coming," one of them said. "I did," she replied. "You encouraged it." "No, I listened to it." The panel went silent. "Do you believe humans should speak for themselves?" Verini didn't flinch. "I believe law without voice becomes decree, and decree without empathy becomes tyranny." They stripped her of her title. She left without protest. Back in the hall, the recess ended. The court announced that further deliberation was required. Not dismissal, not approval, but consideration. That single word sent shockwaves across systems. Consideration meant review. Review meant recognition. It meant the system had blinked. Elias heard the verdict from a mining colony orbiting Sigma Draconis, where he'd gone to stay off-grid. He was staring at a photograph, one of the few physical mementos he carried. It showed a courtroom, long before the ban, when arguments were messy and passionate and wrong sometimes, but honest. He tucked the photo away. Anika messaged him. "We got through. They can't ignore us anymore." His reply was brief. Not yet a victory. Her answer came faster. No, but finally a beginning. And somewhere, deep in the archival memory of a system built to silence, a voice long denied whispered to the circuits. Unresolved, unquantified, unforgettable.